Could you please step out if you're going to keep sneezing, Michael? We're trying to set priorities here. I heard the words echo off the glass walls, a little sharper than necessary, as I pressed a tissue to my nose for the 5th time that hour. It was Monday, 9:14 a.m., and the weekly release meeting had just started. The air in the conference room felt syrupy and stale, heavy with recycled dust. I could smell something odd beneath the usual office tang of burnt coffee, a bitter metallic note, almost like solder. I glanced up at the flickering ceiling vent and felt my eyes itch all over again. I tried to make myself smaller in the chair. Mr. Canning, our new operations director, watched me over the rim of his tablet. His tie was too tight, his jaw clenched. Every syllable he spoke felt like a test. Around the table, the team kept their heads down, eyes on their screens, pretending not to notice the tension. As I bent forward to muffle another sneeze, I caught the look on Sarah's face, half sympathy, half warning, and watched as one of the interns quietly excused himself from the room, hand clamped over his mouth. My name is Michael Rowe. I'm 34, a systems architect at Aperture North, Cincinnati. It's my 3rd year here, long enough to understand which servers were haunted, which managers needed status reports in triplicate, which corners of the office grew cold first when the AC kicked in. I'm an introvert by default, the kind who takes his lunch at his desk and leaves his headphones in, even when there's nothing playing. My superpower is going unnoticed. My allergy is going nowhere. I was diagnosed when I was 16. Allergic rhinitis, chronic and apparently unimpressed by any of the pills or sprays prescribed over the years. I learned early to accept my limits, to quietly leave the room when the world turned against my immune system. I used to joke with old girlfriends that I could detect a dusty house before I crossed the threshold. It never got me far, but it kept me careful. What kept me at Aperture North was the order, the ritual. I liked my quiet mornings, the hum of hardware booting up, the steady rhythm of code reviews. I liked that nobody expected me to join happy hour or comment on office politics. I did my job, kept my head down, and tried not to let my sinuses dictate my worth. But the building itself had changed in the past months. The air felt heavier. The vents above my cubicle rattled more than usual, and the faint moldy scent lingered no matter how often facilities sprayed air freshener. Sarah, one of the lead developers, had started keeping a tiny desk fan pointed at her face all day. "It's better than nothing," she'd say, eyes red-rimmed, voice hoarse. I noticed she coughed more now. I wasn't the only one, but I was the only one who got called out. When the meeting finally ended, Mr. Canning cornered me by the elevators. "You need to get this under control," he said in that clipped tone of his, barely moving his lips. "This is a high-performance environment, Michael. People notice these things." He tapped his watch, a silver analog thing that looked like it weighed more than my laptop. I nodded, too tired to argue, and slipped out. Back at my desk, I sat staring at the HR portal, half wondering if I should log a complaint or just tough it out. My email pinged, subject, HR policy violation. My quarterly bonus was being withheld for disruptive conduct, per a direct recommendation from operations. There was no meeting, no appeal, just a short note copied to my manager and added to my file. I closed my eyes, counted backward from 10. In, out, just like the breathing exercises my allergist had taught me. I read the email 3 more times, saving it to a private folder along with every correspondence I'd had with HR for the past 2 years. I made a note on my phone. Monday, 5 sneezes, air thick, weird chemical odor, Sarah coughing, intern left room. That night, as I walked through the parking lot, I felt an ache settle deep in my chest, a kind of tiredness I couldn't shake. I reached my car and noticed for the first time a small blue fob wedged under my windshield wiper. At first, I thought it was a parking notice, but it was just a plastic keychain, unmarked except for a faded sticker, a white triangle inside a black circle. I turned it over in my hands, unsure if it was a joke or just misplaced. On a hunch, I dropped it in my bag and drove home. My apartment was silent, save for the hum of the fridge. I washed my hands, changed clothes, made a mug of peppermint tea. My mother used to say that order was the only antidote to chaos. I sat at my kitchen table, organizing my thoughts, and realized I didn't feel angry, just suspicious. Like a thread had come loose in my otherwise careful routine. After dinner, I started my own log. Every symptom, every odd smell, every vent that rattled or spewed visible dust. I snapped photos with my phone, the ceiling above my cubicle, the air filter in the break room, a strange patch of discoloration near the supply closet. I also photographed the blue key fob, front and back, and added it to a folder labeled May Allergies. The next day, I packed a Ziploc bag and a pair of latex gloves in my backpack. At lunch, when the office thinned out, I carefully unscrewed the grill on the vent near my desk. Dust came down in clumps, but under it I found a tiny fragment of crumpled paper wedged behind a metal support. I pried it loose and tucked it into the bag with the dust sample. The paper was torn, but on it I could just make out the outline of a technical schematic, network nodes, IP addresses, the familiar logo of our company, but with a project name I'd never seen, Aegis Alpha. At first, I thought it was just old trash, a discarded project note. But why would it be stuffed in the vent? I stared at it, the code side of my brain waking up, analyzing connections. I remembered the odd way the network had hiccuped last Thursday, the way certain directories in the shared drive were suddenly locked down, even to admin users. Curiosity became habit. I spent the next few evenings researching. Aegis Alpha was nowhere in our official project list, not even in old quarterly reports. I scoured employee forums, old company newsletters, LinkedIn posts, nothing. The triangle and circle symbol from the key fob wasn't in our branding, but after a few hours I found it on a vendor contract from years ago, attached to an environmental systems audit. I texted Sarah late that night, asking if she'd ever heard of Aegis Alpha. She replied a minute later, "No, why? You okay?" I thought about sending her a photo of the schematic, but hesitated. Instead, I just wrote, "Just curious." Weird week. The next morning, Mr. Canning didn't show up to the stand-up. Instead, the HR director stopped by, smiling a little too wide. She told us about new health initiatives and handed out a feedback form. I watched as she lingered near the supply closet, eyeing the vent above it. Back at my desk, I opened the schematic and tried to map its nodes to the floor plan of our office. It didn't quite match. There was a cluster of icons, a network switch, a power relay, labeled Sub B1, but there was no sub-basement on any of the company's official diagrams. I'd seen enough bad movies to know when something didn't add up. Over the next week, I kept my head down, but watched more closely. The maintenance team came by twice, always the same two guys in gray coveralls. I saw them carry a locked case into the server room, only to emerge 30 minutes later, faces tight, eyes darting. Once, late at night, I watched from the parking lot as they loaded a metal crate into the back of an unmarked van. The triangle symbol was stenciled on the side in faded paint. My curiosity became something closer to anxiety. I checked the access logs for the secure server racks, the ones only IT architects were supposed to touch. I noticed a string of entries from a badge number I didn't recognize, after hours, on weekends, always in the zone labeled Sub B1. I considered sending an anonymous tip to security, but something stopped me. I wanted to understand what I'd found before I risked blowing the whistle. Instead, I doubled down on my logs. Every cough, every meeting where the air turned sour, every time I saw that triangle symbol appear on a piece of equipment or a maintenance badge. Then, one evening as I was leaving, I noticed Sarah in the hallway, arguing quietly with one of the gray-suited maintenance men. She looked scared, angry. I ducked behind a pillar, listening. He kept repeating something about compliance, and she kept saying, "It's making people sick." He finally handed her a sealed envelope and walked away. Sarah slipped it into her bag and hurried toward the elevators. I waited until she'd gone, then slipped into the stairwell, mind racing. I knew, without knowing how, that whatever was happening in our building wasn't just about neglected filters or mold. Something else was running beneath the surface, something they'd gone to great lengths to hide. I started sleeping with my phone on the nightstand, waking every time a car passed outside. The air in the apartment seemed heavier too, or maybe it was just my nerves. And in the morning, when I walked into the office and saw the triangle symbol taped to my monitor, I realized I was no longer just an allergic bystander. I was in the middle of something much bigger, and I needed to decide whose side I was really on. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the sense that someone was watching me. Every time I glanced up from my code, I'd catch a reflection in the glass. Someone moving past my cubicle, the shadow of a maintenance cart, the flicker of the triangle symbol on a passing badge. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was just tired. But when you've spent years building systems, you start to notice patterns, and this one was getting harder to ignore. That evening, as the office emptied out and most people headed for the elevators, I lingered in the break room, pretending to scroll through my phone. I watched as Sarah made her way to her desk, her posture tense, her eyes darting to the door every few seconds. I waited until the last person had left, then approached her, keeping my voice low. "Everything all right?" I asked, nodding toward her bag. She hesitated, then sighed, glancing over her shoulder. "Michael, you ever wonder why half the vents in here blow cold air and the other half make you feel like you're drowning in dust?" I didn't answer. She pulled the envelope from her bag, handed it to me without a word. Inside was a stack of papers, printed emails, old inspection reports, a faded floor plan with the same Sub B1 label I'd seen before. At the top was a memo stamped Confidential Environmental Systems Assessment. Sarah leaned closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "My uncle used to work for the contractor that built this office," she said. "He told me before he retired that there was a sub-basement, sealed off years ago, never shown to the city inspectors. When I started getting sick, I started digging. That envelope? I found it in the archives, misfiled. The triangle logo? That's the subcontractor. They were brought in for something classified. And now there's mold, electrical surges, missing network logs. I think something's leaking up from there." She pressed her lips together, as if worried she'd already said too much. We sat together in silence for a long minute. In the distance, the janitor's cart rattled down the hallway. "So what now?" I asked quietly. Sarah stared at her hands. "You're the only person I trust here, Michael, but I think they know I've been looking. I'm pretty sure they know about you, too." The triangle symbol on my monitor suddenly felt less like a prank and more like a warning. That night, I took the papers home and spread them across my kitchen table, matching dates and diagrams, looking for anything that would make sense of the chaos above. Most of it was technical. Airflow charts, pressure readings, HVAC maintenance notes. But then I found a chain of emails between the subcontractor and someone at corporate, discussing temporary containment, negative pressure zones, and off-site disposal schedules. The last message was dated 7 months ago, the same time the allergies in the office had exploded and when canning had been transferred in. I started writing everything down: dates, symptoms, technical anomalies. I scanned the badge access logs again, more late-night entries to Sub B1, this time followed by unexplained network outages on our main server. The next day, I checked the directory for Aegis Alpha. It was gone, deleted. When I tried to access archived backups, I found my credentials had been revoked. I realized with a sudden chill that I was probably being watched too. The next week blurred into one long, slow panic. Sarah was out sick. HR said she'd taken unpaid leave, but I found her laptop still plugged in at her desk. A new maintenance crew arrived, this time with outside security. The triangle symbol was now on every crate they rolled into the loading dock. On Thursday, a message appeared in my inbox from an anonymous address. "Leave it alone. Not your concern. You've been warned." My first instinct was to delete it, to walk away, to tell myself none of this was my problem. But every time I sneezed, every time my throat burned, Every time I watched another colleague call in sick, I remembered the blue key fob and the dust sample I'd sent to the lab. I remembered my mother's advice: order is the only antidote to chaos. I made a copy of everything: Sarah's envelope, the floor plans, the emails, the logs. I put them on an encrypted USB drive, hid it in the lining of my backpack, and uploaded a backup to a secure cloud account I'd created under a fake name. That Friday night, I walked past the old elevator at the end of the hall. The triangle symbol was painted above the call button. The light flickered on as I approached, though I hadn't pressed anything. The doors slid open, revealing a narrow shaft lined with cables and dust. There was a keypad inside, a place for a badge or a key fob. My hands were sweating as I pulled the blue fob from my pocket. I slid it into the reader. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a heavy thunk, the elevator began to move. Down, deeper than the basement, the lights dimming with each floor. When the doors finally opened, I stepped into a cold, silent corridor. The air was thick, metallic, tinged with something sweet and rotten. Along the wall were rows of electrical panels and servers humming quietly, lights blinking in patterns I didn't recognize. At the end of the hall was a heavy locked door. On it, the triangle and circle symbol, painted in fresh black. I took a photo with my phone, then paused, listening. Footsteps echoed somewhere behind me, quick, deliberate, closing in. I turned, heart hammering, and slipped back into the elevator, stabbing the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of a shadow at the end of the corridor, a figure in gray coveralls, watching. Back in my apartment, I locked the door, drew the blinds, and tried to steady my breathing. The files were safe, at least for now, but I knew things were spiraling beyond anything I'd expected. On Monday, HR sent a company-wide email. Due to ongoing renovations, certain areas of the building will be temporarily inaccessible. Please comply with all posted signage and report any suspicious activity. Sarah's desk was cleared out. Her name disappeared from the internal directory. When I called her cell, it went straight to voicemail. I realized then, some secrets were meant to stay buried. But this time, I wasn't sure I could walk away. The next morning, the office felt different. I noticed more closed doors, more security badges clipped to unfamiliar jackets, a fresh layer of silence under the usual mechanical whir. Every hallway seemed a little emptier. The break room chatter had shifted. No more jokes about allergies or the vents. People were careful now, voices low, eyes darting. I kept to my routine, acting as invisible as possible. It wasn't hard. Most of the new people ignored me. But my mind was racing. I thought of Sarah's envelope, the floor plans, that midnight ride down to the secret sub-basement, the way the air tasted. Wrong, artificial, almost electric. That week, I began noticing subtle changes in the building. Maintenance was everywhere, running cables, replacing ceiling tiles, quietly swapping out old air filters for bigger industrial units. The triangle and circle symbol had migrated, no longer just on maintenance gear, but now stenciled on the back of a server rack near my own department. One night, working late, I found a small black case under my chair. Inside, a standard corporate USB drive and a typed note. For your safety, drop this in the outgoing mail bin by Friday. No copies, no backups. Walk away. There was no signature, just that symbol in the top right corner. I considered turning it over to IT security, but the building felt hostile to the idea of asking questions. Even the open-door HR sessions had been suspended due to restructuring. I took the USB home and scanned it with a sandboxed laptop. It contained only one file, a single audio recording, time-stamped 6 months earlier. A man's voice, anxious and quick, began. They said the containment was temporary. But the readings spiked again last week, higher than ever. We can't keep filtering it through the main system, not without people noticing. If anyone finds this, shut it down. Don't trust facilities. Don't trust canning. I listened to it 3 times, trying to place the voice. I was almost sure it was one of the old building engineers, the same man I'd seen around late at night when I first started at Aperture North, long before Canning's arrival. He'd vanished last winter. No notice, no farewell email. I wondered how many people had tried to raise alarms before me, and what happened to those who hadn't given up. On Thursday, I met Sarah in a crowded coffee shop 10 blocks from the office. She looked different, older, thinner, eyes ringed with fatigue. "I can't go back, Michael," she said quietly. "Not after what I found down there. Not after what they did to Don." He tried to blow the whistle, but corporate buried the report. They told OSHA it was a ventilation upgrade accident. I have the originals, the full inspection logs, the readings. But if they trace them back to me... She trailed off, glancing nervously around. I handed her the USB drive, wrapped in a napkin. "Someone wants this gone," I said. "There's a recording. I think it's Don." Sarah's hands shook as she slipped the drive into her purse. "Keep the files you have," she whispered. "But be careful. They're watching anyone who goes near that sublevel." That night, I set up a dead man's switch, an automated message, set to send my backup to multiple news outlets if anything happened to me. I encrypted the folder, scattered the keys in different places. It felt paranoid, but after everything, paranoia felt like the only sensible reaction. By Friday, the changes in the office became impossible to ignore. The renovations closed off a whole wing of the building. Half my team was suddenly assigned to work from home for health reasons. The rest were moved to temporary desks, crammed into windowless rooms. The air, for the first time in months, felt almost clean. Then, early the next week, an email from corporate. "Due to findings during a recent environmental audit, all operations will be temporarily suspended pending a full investigation by federal authorities. Employees will be compensated and contacted with further instructions. Do not enter the building until notified." I watched the news that night, heart pounding, as a story flashed across the local feed. Anonymous whistleblower triggers investigation at tech firm. Sources report hazardous materials, ventilation irregularities, and ongoing safety violations. The footage showed a line of hazmat-suited inspectors entering Aperture North. The camera lingered on the triangle and circle logo stenciled above the service entrance. My phone vibrated with a message from Sarah. "You did it. We're safe now." "Thank you." I stared at the screen, relief warring with a lingering dread. I knew the company would spin the story, that a new round of silence and NDAs would follow, that whatever was buried under sub B1 might never truly see daylight. But the air at least would be safe for the people who came after us. A week later, a package arrived at my apartment. No return address, just my name written in block letters. Inside was the blue key fob, polished and clean, along with a note. For order, for silence, for the ones who watch. I slipped the fob into a drawer, knowing I'd never use it again. The world went on. I found remote contracts, spent more time running, called my mother every Sunday. Sometimes, when the windows were open and the air was fresh, I remembered what it felt like to breathe easy. I never heard from Canning again. Sarah moved west, changed her name. Don's voice faded from memory, except on nights when the city was too quiet, and I wondered how many stories still lay hidden, sealed behind concrete and codes. Order, in the end, was never about rules or routines. It was the courage to notice when something was wrong, and to do something about it, even when you were scared, even when you had to do it alone. And in the clean morning air, for the first time in years, I was grateful simply to exist, unnoticed, alive, and free.